ladies and gentlemen, and all attendees of World Travel Market Africa. It is such a good thing to be able to interact, even if it's not physically, but virtually, and bring you some of the ideas that we hope will build our future together. Our team from BDO, our tourism team, would like to chat a little bit around how do we build resilience and what do we need to do. In BDO, we use a tool called Rethink. It is a tool that really looks at your risks around your business, your organization, your destination. And we've used this quite successfully across the tourism industry, particularly looking at destinations as well as even strategies for specific type of products such as events strategies. So what is Rethink? How do we think that that can help you in your businesses? We all know that the tourism industry has been very hard hit through the whole COVID pandemic. We deal with this every day. We are all, I think, very tired of listening to the numbers and wondering when things can come back to some kind of normality, when we can do some kind of planning that could help us for at least a length of time. We know that tourism and aviation sits as basically the biggest losers. However, this doesn't mean that we don't have other parties and sitting in other sectors that are not concerned about what is happening in our industry. We're not totally on our own, because financial services, banks are highly affected by what happens to the tourism industry, and sort of getting bank accounts paid, loans paid, etc. There's far less building happening of new facilities. So the construction industry is being affected. The food and retail industry has indicated to us very, very clearly that they can feel, and even furniture businesses have indicated. So being an audit and an accounting and a business advisory firm, we essentially hear that you can't necessarily all put a sector specific. You hear it from different sectors and how they're feeling it when something happens to other sectors as well. So we are all in it, whether we want to be or not. So how do we then define that resilience? The tool basically says that at the moment, what we're doing is we immediately reacting when anything happens and changes get made. So the whole COVID epidemic happened, pandemic happened, and our immediate action is to react. How do I safeguard my business? What do I do for right now? Do I let people go? Can I stay open? Can I not stay open, etc.? And we have essentially for a whole year been in this kind of sort of motion of going up and down, up and down. It is a whole sort of blip about, and essentially we're a little bit of a bubble being bounced around. But in order to get from that and move on to a longer time of resilience, to then move to what we would call the upward trend of realization and succeeding. And this is just not succeeding because we're going to go back to what it was. It's succeeding in new normal and finding out what that new normal is. We have to rethink. We have to rethink our strategies. We have to rethink the way that we do business. We have to rethink our structures. We have to rethink how we interact with each other, our markets, our products, everything. It is essentially a rethink so that we can then embed some resilience to keep our business afloat. And to some extent, it's getting beyond that decision inertia, where I just don't know, or I just go to the reaction again and wait for the next big thing to happen. And I have to close down again and open up again and close down. And so as every one of those waves hit you, you use a little bit more of your savings if you had them. You use a little bit more of the tools which now are no longer available to you, or the funding. And we tend to move then to not thinking about your business in a long enough term so that you can basically be ready to bounce back when greater tourism bounces back. I'd like to just bring in my colleagues, Leanne and Jabulani, into this whole discussion, because this is basically looking at then, okay, how do we build resilience in order to reignite? There's a number of factors. One set of the factors really works around values, personal and company values. The others work around systems, and the third tends to work around data and data analytics. Leanne's going to deal quite in detail with data and what kind of data we believe that businesses and destinations and tourism need and should be tracking. But maybe let's talk a little bit about how do we develop trust? And you can see there in the top factor, there's a lot of aspects that need to be in place to really have trust. Leanne, your feelings? What is most important in building trust?
If I may step in, Christelle, my feeling is that confidence is quite important. Confidence not only in the processes of you as an organization from a market perspective, but also confidence within an organization from an internal stakeholder perspective. There needs to be that confidence that that build trust not only amongst internal stakeholders, but more importantly to external stakeholders as well. That's where relationship comes in from an external stakeholder perspective, and also communication from an internal stakeholder perspective. Communication is quite important in ensuring that everyone across the entire hierarchy of a company understand what the overall objective is, and also what their contribution is towards achieving not only confidence from an organizational perspective, but also putting out that confidence and trust and value to the external stakeholders.
Yes. So what I'm hearing you saying, Jay, and I totally agree with you, it is to find that level of commitment, not only within yourself, within your organization, but in the bigger community of tourism and even the bigger community of the country, so that we are doing this together. A lot of sharing, a lot of relationships in the industry and outside it. But in order to do that, it is to create an energy. And I think, it's very hard to be resilient and to bounce back if you cannot have that energy. We were talking about it. We often sometimes use the word passion, but in this time, it's less a word of passion than it is of energy to get up, to try something. It may not work, and to try something again. Leanne, what do you think? The bigger us, is that important at the moment?
Absolutely. The bigger us is absolutely important. And I think there's lots of examples around the world, not only during this time of pandemic, but during other crises, where organizations and people have developed resilience mainly from the bigger us. And that's through collaboration, sharing information, working together. And that means competitors working together as well. And also, what I really like, Christelle, about this particular BDO tool is the fact that trust is on top, because trust is actually reliant also on underlying factors in our model here, which is systems and processes and data and analytics. And confidence comes from knowledge. So the more knowledge you have, the more confident you can be to speak out and to make really big decisions. And this is a time for really big decisions.
Absolutely.
So you need data, and data comes from many different sources. But one of the ways of getting data is from collaboration. So sharing information between organizations and entities, so you can all make that bigger decision. And some of them are really tough decisions. So yeah, so that's why I like the model in particular. And as you know, we all know I'm a data and analytics fundi, and I enjoy doing all the data and analytics and trying to work out the implications and what this all means. But I wanted to ask you, Christelle, a question around systems and processes. Can you give some recommendations in terms of the systems and processes a business should have in place in order to ensure that they are resilient and can survive through this really tough times?
So sometimes, Leanne, we think that these are the big ticket items, but it really is just making sure that your accounting systems are working, they're working properly, the recording, even if your business is not at the moment in full-time operation, still making sure that all those control measures, etc., are in place. Because it's very important that when you suddenly decide that you maybe need to restructure your business, or you need to bring on a partner, that you actually have the information to provide those partners. And if you need to go to the bank, or if you want to apply now to the Tourism Equity Fund or any other funds, you need the information that comes out of those systems and processes in place. It was quite interesting talking to our restructuring colleagues at BDO, and we asked them, how do they see it with some of their clients? How are the banks reacting? Are they coming to the party? And the quick answer to that is, if you were a good standing business client, yes. But if you were already missing payments, etc., beforehand, before COVID hit, then probably not. So again, those systems and processes are making sure that your payments are done on a consistent basis, and that you're handling the right kind of ways of doing your business. Whether you're small or whether you're a large entity, the same applies. Business structuring can be applied to, or business restructuring, to big or large. We always think that this has got to do with very large organizations, and it's not necessarily so. It is also very important that you go back and have these relationships and these agreements in place with suppliers. At the moment, we know a lot of suppliers have come and gone. There may be an assumption that even though that supply is there, so therefore that will work in exactly the same way. Have discussions with them, find out how they're doing, so that you know whether you can actually rely on them when you tend to go back to businesses. So it's really making those things agile, making sure that they are structured, making sure that they are sound. Our one colleague in business restructuring often talks about the zombie companies that are, and these are companies that walk around, that look like companies and do their thing, but essentially they are already the living dead. And unfortunately, it's a terrible thing to have to say, but there may also need a decision. So I guess some resilience may be that I actually need to close down in this format, and I need to rethink how I do this business, come back in a different business or do it jointly with somebody else, instead of continuing on when it's just not possible to actually revive that business, to be able to bounce back when there is a bounce back. Leanne, so let's get to that.
That is such an important point. Sorry to interrupt you, Christelle.
No problem.
Around the ability to bounce back, especially when you consider one of the sub-values of system and processes, and that has been quite important in this COVID pandemic period, which is adaptability and agility. The ability of your business to, within, of course, the system and processes, to change to the prevailing environment. Because I mean, it's all very well and good having systems and processes, but if they don't enable the business to adapt to a new, not only a new internal requirements, but new market requirements, the business, as you said, will be moved from a viable going concern to a zombie business when we reach the next crisis ahead.
So Leanne, thanks, Jay. Good to know that flexibility, absolutely. And I think that is the name of the game at the moment, is flexibility for continuity. Leanne, let's maybe then talk about data and data analytics. Obviously, there's a lot of data, but there's some information that we have to track again, continuously watch. And we hate to do some of them because at the moment they are not necessarily very positive, but they all tell us things. Yes. Whether we think they do or don't. So let's maybe look at some of these the information on the industry we've pulled together and see what it tells us about resilience and rethinking. and not just for the fact of having stats.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Christelle. So let's move on to the next slide.
Sorry, I've gone in the wrong direction.
You have gone in the right direction.
I had. There we are.
Okay, so one more slide.
There we are.
Okay, so this, Christelle,
Must I click through for you?
Yeah, this is good. So this slide is actually a graph showing the confirmed daily COVID cases in South Africa. So this is the confirmed cases. Of course, it's not actual cases, it's the data we've been tracking. And to me, this is one of the most important slides to actually, or bits of data to track at the moment during the pandemic. And the white basically shows the daily number of cases. And what it is showing is that we are currently tracking around about 1,000 cases a day, which is roughly around about 20 cases per million of population. It shows that we've had our two surges. The first surge, which started sort of towards the end of June and ended around about mid-August. And the second surge, the biggest surge, which I just want to say it's bigger because it started off a bigger base. Remember, the first surge started from 0. The second surge started off a bigger base. The second surge started around about mid-December and has probably ended around about mid-February. But also, so that's showing that we are now in an intersurge phase. It's also indicating that until we're through COVID, we're likely to see more surges. And obviously the vaccination rollout is quite a key requirement to sort of limit the extent of any future surges we might have. To the extent that we can be vaccinated fast enough to prevent a third or fourth surge, we don't know yet. That time is still to tell. But I think it's important just to look back historically. And these red indicators are showing some of the harsh conditions, if you want to call it, that the travel and tourism industry has been subjected to during this really tough time. So remember, we went through lockdowns, level 5, level 4, level 3, where we were not even allowed to leave our homes. Then we weren't allowed to leave our provinces, and then we were allowed to travel interprovincially, but our borders were closed and nobody was allowed into our country. We were not allowed alcohol, and we weren't allowed, for the smokers, they can acutely remember that we weren't allowed tobacco as well. And so we went through surge 1 with these really tough restrictions on ourselves individually, but on our sector as well. The fact that we're still here does indicate how resilient we actually are, that we've managed to survive a lot of all these sort of lockdowns and some of the implications for our sector. So we've seen gradual reopening of the sector to the extent where we around about beginning of October, we opened our international borders. We were allowed to start traveling domestically for business only at the end of lockdown 3A, which was mid-June, and then some restaurants opened, etc. And then when our surge 2 started, and the so-called South African variant, which I prefer just to call 501V2, although it's got a 501Y something V2, we had some implications in terms of the hotspot beaches were closed, which was disastrous, particularly because it came right before our peak holiday period. And then we had this so-called banning of travel from and to South Africa, or if not banning, some serious implications around quarantine if people actually travel to or from South Africa. This put a major dampener on what we were hoping was going to be a slightly recovered in season for the foreign tourism market for December through to March. So we basically had to survive on essentially no foreign tourism for a year now. So although our beaches and dams and have all been reopened, and we're now back at lockdown level 1, and we do have a curfew, events are allowed for up to 100 people. Remembering that events were allowed for up to 250 people during the intersurge level at our previous lockdown level 1. So they've been a little more restrictive in terms of events. But even in addition to that, we have had, so it's been tough, it's been resilient. There has been a little bit of support that we've received from government. We've received support in the format of TERS. And yes, it's come, and in the announcements have been pretty lumpy. And the payouts have been pretty lumpy for those that have managed to receive payouts. And I know there have been challenges for many organizations but it has certainly been there that has provided some relief to the employees in the sector, and that means some relief to the organizations in the sector as well. There was also the 200 million tourism relief fund, which was able to benefit not all businesses, obviously, but 4,000 businesses in the travel and tourism sector managed to get some relief from the tourism relief fund. And then also on the positive side was the release of our tourism protocols. Now these protocols, I mean, we released them early on in May, and they've been widely applied. A lot of, almost just about every travel and tourism industry entity has adopted these protocols and has allowed for sort of safe travel. So now what we need to do as a sector is we need to focus on maintaining the sort of intersurge level for as long as possible and play our role in trying to prevent it from surging again. And if we go into the next slide, you will see that South Africa actually hasn't performed that badly compared to the United States, which is the sort of brown line, the zigzaggy brown line on this graph, the European Union, which is the green line, and the United Kingdom. So you can see we've had these two peaks. The USA, UK, and European Union have had a very prolonged peak over their winter period and very high peak over the winter period. And even at the moment, when we're at an intersurge level with approximately 20 per million, United Kingdom, I think, is somewhere, yeah, I don't actually, let me just have a look quickly in terms of where we actually are. But in terms of the size, in terms of population, we're looking at, so UK roughly 84 cases, confirmed daily cases per million, USA roughly 165 per million, and the EU roughly 294. Now so the question comes to bear is the fact that South Africa is actually at the 20 number of 20 cases per million was always a sort of pivotal point that was the indicator in terms of allowing and opening up borders. So I have a big question as to why we've got this huge ban on travel to South Africa, which is still very much in place when we are actually handling the pandemic a lot better than our source markets.
So the
on
information, so Leanne,
Pardon?
maybe one of the things is that, you know, it's very important to realize that it's not just about what is happening in South Africa, it's still what is happening in the rest of
in
the
our
world.
source markets.
And
Correct.
particularly those source markets. And, you know, although South Africa is now ready and we should expect, it is perhaps a bit of a slower movement than we would want to, but they're not ready to take those steps as yet. Yeah, absolutely.
But unfortunately, the negative implications for South Africa is the fact that they still supposedly have this ban on travel to and from South Africa, and South Africa is still being cited as a bad country, if you want to call it, because our so-called variant. And the slide before basically showed that we're not the bad country. We're actually doing very well, and so that they're sort of deflecting attention away from their own countries, onto us, and it's, you know, it's questionable to me. So this map shows the vaccination rollout. So this is as of 2 days ago, the vaccination rollout. And so what is showing here? You need to be cautious in terms of the actual the graph here. This is number of vaccinations per 100 people. So you can see that South Africa and Zimbabwe, believe it or not, are actually sitting between 0.1 and 0.3 vaccinations per 100,000 people. So we're actually at 0.27 or something as of 2 days ago. And Zimbabwe is in roughly the same sort of position. The countries that are leading the way is the UK with 39 vaccinations per 100 people, UAE at 67, Israel with 109, bearing in mind that there's a lot of double dosage. Remember, so there's a lot of vaccinations that require 2 vaccines. So it doesn't necessarily mean 100% of the population has been vaccinated yet. The USA has caught up wonderfully already. So they're at 33. And Chile is at 39 per 100. So those countries are leading the way. But for me, the biggest thing about this map is looking at that big hole which is Africa. And bearing in mind that our source markets in particular are looking for reassurance, not only do they want to be vaccinated, but they want to know that their host country where they're traveling to has been vaccinated too. So even with us trying our best as in South Africa to try and ramp up the rate of vaccinations, we've got to consider the rest of Africa. We're part of Africa. And a lot of itineraries incorporate the rest of many other African countries too. So we can't just be the sort of standalone country on the tip of Africa that's vaccinating and the rest of the countries aren't. The good news is many vaccinations have started in many African countries, although it's very slow. I mean, we're at 170,000 vaccines or somewhere around there, been administered so far. And many African countries are sort of that level or much lower, but it is starting. And I suppose it's the often lamented issue. The biggest issue is that the first world countries are the ones who are digging in first, and it's me myself first, before we actually influence or see how the rest of the world is looking in terms of vaccines.
And one of the other, this maybe to add, Leanne, one of the other aspects that we need to keep in mind, and if Africa remains, I don't know, a bit of a light spot, I guess, as it shows on the map, is that quite a lot of our connections, international flight connections, come through Africa these days, through the various hubs, etc. as well. So even if they're only going to come to South Africa, they may still come through connections. And if we want to improve the African market, then we need to obviously have those as well, because that is what is necessary.
Yeah, we are very integrated with the rest of Africa.
Yeah.
And this map is actually showing the current travel restrictions, which basically shows that just about every single country in the world has got partial to almost total restrictions on travel. So we can do as much as we can. In South Africa, we are very reliant on what other countries are doing too. Sorry, and I just want to say that in terms of the when borders will open and when things are going to look better, the vaccination rollout is happening fast. This quote at the bottom here is from the UK, where they're saying international travel likely to restart later than 17 May, which is quite distressing. But it's about being realistic. We need to plan accordingly. Australia talking about around about end of October, opening up their borders. But that's with this information, we as an industry can arm ourselves better and plan accordingly to make ourselves sustainable so that we can be there when these borders actually do open up again and we can actually service our key markets.
So maybe let me take this one. So as we know, aviation is exceptionally important for foreign travel. And it has made great inroads in moving people significantly and I guess connecting the world. But aviation is in a crisis, and this comes from the horse's mouth, from the various IATA reports, etc., that we've seen, and from airlines specifically as well. This is definitely the most profound deconnecting of modern society since World War II. And I think it is scary for us to think about it in that way, because we've become so used to just be able to fly. It is also exceptionally important that we fix this because we need these airlines to take up. South Africa has had its own issues to deal with in respect of SAA, and we need to make sure that these relationships that we have with the airline industries remain in place and remain sound, so that we can get the destination of the airlines in when we have that rebound and resurgence. Very important.
I think from a timing perspective, Christelle, this crisis couldn't have come at the worst time for the continent, especially from an aviation perspective, given that, in the lead up to the crisis, the continent, finally there was consensus around the Africa Free Trade Agreement, which was going to enable the free movement of goods and, more importantly, free movement of people, which would have resulted in greater connectivity between African countries to facilitate trade, knowledge sharing, and also to stimulate greater economic activity and development. So it will be quite important for not only the tourism stakeholders, but the continent to embed the recovery of aviation in tourism's recovery, especially with a view of increasing and leveraging of that Africa Trade Agreement, increasing connectivity, and also increasing the movement of goods within the continent.
Absolutely.
And you know, I just from an airline perspective, I think we've got a huge advantage of the fact that the large airlines are showing a distinct interest in returning to South Africa as soon as possible. So we haven't been left out in the cold. But the biggest problem, of course, is that recovery of these airlines, they're going to need high load factors. They're not going to fly these routes just for the sake of, because it's good for South Africa's economy. So high load factors is going to mean low capacity, lowish capacity, and it's also going to mean higher prices for seats. So this is going to have implications in terms of bringing people to our country in the future, which is on the negative side, and something we need to be conscious of going forward.
Okay, so let's talk about numbers, Leanne.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So, you know, foreign arrivals to South Africa. Okay, so in reality, I mean, we've actually not made huge ground in terms of growing foreign tourists to this country over the last 10 years. So we had the World Cup in 2010, which was going to drive a significant amount of tourism into our country. And we did see a big jump in arrivals of 2010, and we were growing thereafter. But in reality, between 2010 and 2019, we've grown at an average annual rate, so compound average growth rate of 3%. Now, this is really lackluster, given that during the same period globally, the world international arrivals across the world grew at roughly 4 to 5%. So we underperformed. And the reason for that was mainly own goals. So do you remember the visa debacle that we had in 2015, which had the biggest negative growth that we saw then? We've had safety issues, we've had Ebola issues. It's not necessarily an own goal. We've had water crisis issues, but we've had all these external factors that have impacted on the tourism sector itself. And we need to make sure that these things, those that we can control, don't happen again. Because we are so vulnerable to these exogenous factors, those factors that we can't control, like an Ebola, like COVID. These things are out of our control. But there's a lot of factors here that are in our control, and we as a sector need to work better and more forcefully with government to overcome a lot of these challenges. So we had this massive drop in tourism numbers this year. So 69% drop in foreign arrivals for 2020. But we have to bear in mind that we actually had almost 3 months of normal tourism. And then we had nothing when our borders closed. And then we started to get little trickles of numbers as our borders opened, as some sort of business tourists came back in, and we had some sort of peaks from certain markets. And interestingly enough, in December, we had a peak from the Russian market. We also had Ghana and the UAE. But our worst hit markets during the sort of the closed border time, and then when it was reopened, has been Italy, Netherlands, France, China, and India. Those ones were the ones that dropped the most. So we need to obviously look into, this is massive implications in terms of how do we actually recoup this. And we've had to rely very much, as we all know, on the domestic market. And it, for many, but not everybody, the domestic market has been a savior. It has been a savior. For some, it hasn't been. We have to be realistic that not every product in our country can actually pivot to the domestic market. And also the domestic market has been very one-sided. It's been domestic leisure. So this has not been much in the way of domestic business, very little, but there has been business travel, but it's been very limited. But then again, on the positive side, a lot of the, we've managed to stimulate a lot of travelers who didn't previously travel. Then they've got to experience some of our product that they've never experienced before, which is fabulous. And we've got to look at not ignoring this market going forward, because it has huge potential. And if you look at successful tourism countries around the world, they're successful because of their domestic tourism market. They've got a strong, robust domestic market. And the foreign market is basically almost like the cream or the cherry on the top in terms of their tourism industry. And that's where really we need to go to. I mean, we've got 60 million people in this country. Imagine if we can get the bulk of them traveling, right from very budget type of accommodation, right the way up to our really upscale accommodation, how that will be able to support the industry going forward. So this is the start, very positive start in my view, for actually growing and establishing that sort of solid base for the domestic market. Obviously, the domestic market has preferred things like self-catering accommodation. There has been a definite need for flexibility. So bring my dogs, I want to bring my granny who needs this particular type of accommodation, all that type of stuff, which I think has really made our product having to adapt in terms of considering the flexibility. They've also had to adapt quite significantly in how they market and going direct to consumer, which I think is fantastic. It's made a lot of product owners think outside the box in terms of how do I attract this market and how do I get them to come to my establishment. So my biggest urge to those who have tackled the domestic market, those who've tackled it successfully and even partially successfully, please don't give up on it. You've won over a whole lot of new clients. Don't abandon them when a foreign tourists come back again. So yeah, hopefully we can start to see some business tourism, MICE tourism pick up as well into the future. Obviously, through this period, our hotels have really, really battled from an occupancy perspective. So this graph, the red dots show the occupancy during the past year, so in 2020. The teal dots show the occupancy for 2019. But there's a little bit of a rider that we need to put here, so that's not totally comparable, because this is all relates to open hotels, not necessarily all hotels. So some hotels closed their doors during the COVID period. So although occupancy went from an average annual of 62% for all hotels, and it dropped to 32%, it's actually lower than 32% if you bring into those closed hotels into the equation. So you can see that there was still some occupancy during the really, really tight lockdown periods, and that a lot of that has got to do with quarantine hotels, emergency services or essential services, and that type of support, and also hospital support. And then occupancy slowly picked up to December. This graph also shows the teal color is 2019 data and the red color is 2020 data. And this is the average rate achieved by hotels for that period per month. And you can see that the average rate, so although occupancy declined for those open hotels by 48%, it only declined by 18% in terms of the average rate. So there's two things I think that's important to note here. One, you can say discounting has been less. But in reality, I think we need to be clear on the fact that what was happening is that hotels were selling direct to the consumer. So there was less in the way of intermediary fees being paid out. So the tour operators, travel agents, etc., they're the ones who lost out because they lost out on the revenue. The consumer gained because they paid a lower rate than they would have paid. The hotels gained too because they probably achieved a higher rate than they would normally have in an environment where they would have to pay out sort of intermediary fees. So the discounting wasn't as much as what we normally see, and also shows the fact that some hotels really sort of said we're going to stick to rate, we'll sacrifice occupancy, we're not going to decrease rate. The big question we always get asked.
Yes, the important question, Leanne. We're going to put our figures out there. We're going to stick to a number. What do we project?
What do we project? This is the question we always asked in terms of where we're going. So I mean, this is definitely a forecast. We don't know. Nobody knows. I wish I had a crystal ball. But we have looked at it and we said, okay, we've looked at it month by month and said, what are we likely to achieve going forward? And I actually think overall 2021 is going to be worse than 2020. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Is because we started off the year without having those 3 months of normal tourism that last year had. So we're starting off the year in the worst possible situation. It's going to keep on improving through the year, but we're not going to get to normal tourism levels by December. For the simple reason that the tourism's return is dependent on the vaccine rollout. And we saw the pace of rollout, we saw the pace of vaccines in the earlier graph, which is, so it's dependent on our source market, but as I said, it also depends on us in terms of how we roll out our vaccines. So yes, we're going to start seeing improvements, but we're nowhere going to get back to normal levels of tourism anywhere in any of the months this year. So we are expecting things to improve by December, start picking up from the end of the first half, but really start picking up from the end of the second quarter. And so we're hoping if we can get over 2 million visitors for the year, that'll be fantastic. And then onwards, with the increased pace of vaccine rollout, we're hoping that we can then start to pick up. It's not only the vaccine rollout, but obviously people need money to travel. And they need systems and processes in place to travel as well. So as people try and sort of re-cement themselves in terms of their economic situation, having money, so they will then start to pick up. And based on this, we're forecasting that it's going to be roughly 2024 before we actually get back to 2019 levels. So it's going to be tough for the next couple of years, but it doesn't mean we're not having no tourism. We're through the worst. It's just that the pace of pickup is probably not going to be at the rate that we would like to see it at. And in reality, we're going to need, if we can get compound average growth rate of 6% after 2024, we can basically get to 13.7 million tourists by 2030. So when that's bearing in mind, remember I said earlier that we've only achieved compound average growth rate CAGR of 3% between 2010 and 2019. So so we're doubling it. And so we need to once again get all our ducks in a row so that we can at least get to 6%. And then on the next slide, if everybody remember, we had the sort of objective of reaching 21 million tourists. And to reach 21 million tourists by 2030, we basically need, let me just get this, make sure I get my data right here. We need to get a CAGR of close to 13% per annum from 2024 onwards to actually get to our target of 21 million. So in reality, I mean, it'll be tough, but we can do it. To achieve this, we really need to have a full range of supply in place. We need to have all the products there. The whole value chain needs to be there. We need a full range of experiences. And we need a whole supply of different sources of demand from all sort of different markets as well. And South Africa needs to take its rightful position on the global stage. So we need to really market the country as well in terms of positioning. And I say rightful position because I mean really we have underperformed, and we need to really show the world that we are a tourism destination that's worthy of of its place in the world, basically. So we need to put quite a lot of effort in there. And then finally, we've got to have this policies, procedures, and support systems that actually support tourism. That's right through government. Everything we do should be how can we support tourism and how can we make this happen? If we can get that in place, we can actually get to 21 million. So we can get back on track, but it's going to take a concerted effort from everybody.
And absolutely no own goals.
No own goals.
But avoid those. So let's talk about some of those change tactics. So what can we do, suggest, recommend, for the industry to also do, to be able to get to those bullish targets? So the question, Jay, is, on everybody's lips, is will we travel again, and will we travel again like we used to travel? So
Yes,
your feeling?
my feeling is definitely we will travel again, and we will. I mean, sooner than actually a lot of the market thinks, we will go back to traveling as we used to know it. I think what the main stumbling block currently now is the issue of market confidence, and market confidence predominantly because of a fear of one, contracting the virus, and also the fear of transmitting the virus with travel. So that's the only current issue now, because if you look at the two important inputs for the industry, from a supply side and from a market demand side, I mean, those are in place and ready. We have the products and services available and waiting. We perhaps would need, given how a lot of the businesses have tapped into their cash reserves to keep their operation afloat, we probably need working capital just to support the restart of a number of products and also the industry value chain more widely. From a market demand perspective, I mean, we have seen a pent-up demand and green shoots of demand in between the different surges of the pandemic, specifically driven, as Leanne mentioned earlier, by the leisure market and also the visiting friends and relative market, which have often, as soon as the restriction in terms of movement and also travel has been eased, have taken advantage to travel, reconnect with friends and family, which gives a positive indication of what the future may be. Unfortunately, I mean, those periods of green shoots or that pent-up demand has not been sustained because of the surges that have come from the intersurge periods, not only in South Africa, but certainly in the rest of the world.
But we need to keep them going, and just to say, let's go again when the next low surge period is, and keep them going.
Which is quite important, because when you consider, I mean, the various market segments from a demand perspective, like I said, we have seen the take up, or at least the enthusiasm to travel from the VFR and the leisure market in between the surges, but that and we have seen trickles of business travel and to some extent youth travel. We haven't seen that consistently or anywhere near, in terms of volume, the numbers that we had previously. So I guess the question then becomes, I mean, not only what are the prerequisites to reignite those other market segments that are quite important for the sustainability of the industry, but also which of the market segments from a recovery perspective are quite important to put tourism on a sustainable path towards recovery without this stop-start that we've experienced in the last 6 months or 9 months.
So for most of the purposes of travel, the prerequisites are actually very similar. For few, there's one or two other things that needs to be done, but generally speaking, we're talking about vaccinations, we're talking about the effective rollout and usage of the protocols, the easing of restrictions to travel into the market. So most of those are very similar. But I see here you sort of expect certain markets, and I think this has been spoken about quite a lot, to come before, to open up before other markets. If maybe between you and Leanne, we can just talk a little bit about, so we're expecting VFR and leisure first, and some of the schools and religious market only later. Why is that?
Okay, so I just want to say that from So the leisure market, obviously the decision to travel is an individual decision to travel. The need to travel to see friends and family is high, and people want to connect with people, and also just to go on holiday. It's high, it's very high. People need to travel for that relaxation point of view. So we've seen, from a domestic point of view, we've seen that increase in domestic travel. And also, it's also got to do with the fact that they can't go overseas, so they don't have a choice or go anywhere else. They don't have a choice. They've had to stay within South Africa. The youth market, I'm going to leave to Jay because that's his area of speciality. But in terms of business travel, that is, although it's happened, and it has been and has happened for a while, it's such a slow little trickle. And the reason is because of online communication. So there's no need to actually go and have those in-person meetings that we used to have. We can do it using technology, but it's also got to do with the risk to the business. So the risk of me sending my employee to go on a business trip and they contract or transmit COVID while they're on a business trip. And so employers are rethinking this, and they've often, many of them have got lots of policies that are actually restricting travel. Whereas previously, business travel, I think the staff member often didn't have a choice. They were told, you will do this, you will do that, and you will travel here. Whereas now the staff members are actually turning around and saying, I'm not going to travel, I'm not comfortable. So there's a whole sort of rethink about business travel, and to what extent is business travel actually going to recover to the levels that it previously was? I don't think it's ever going to get to those sort of levels again. That's my view. So it will take a while to actually kick off again. And it's really got to do with the safety of the employees. And when it comes to the MICE market, now the MICE market, we know that these sort of gatherings are seen as super spreader events, which is such an unfortunate label that has been given to events. Because I do believe that the MICE sector has proven time and time again that they can host events, in-person events, successfully. And with the rollout of rapid testing, I don't see why we can't have people getting together for conferences and even big events. It does involve logistical planning and making sure that it happens. But as soon as we get these sort of protocols more aligned and accepted, we can see the resurgence from a MICE perspective. MICE events will definitely be hybrid going forward. There's no looking back on that, but the need for in-person events is becoming more and more acute. And this part of our sector has been the hardest hit because there have been no events, or very few events. So, and of course the ramifications around it are from the guys who develop the decor, who supply
absolutely entertainment,
the stands, all of that. I mean, the ramifications are huge in terms of the sector. So the sooner we can get it going, the better. I'd love to see it happening sooner than later, but it requires a commitment from government to see that these events can be held safely. So over to you, Jay, on the youth travel side.
Correctly. I think from a youth travel perspective, I think two things needs to be considered in terms of the likely market demand recovery. One is that it is the segment of the market that is the least risk averse. And also it appears that it's the section of the segment of the market that has been most affected by what we commonly known as cabin fever. Because we've seen it certainly in South Africa and also in Europe, in North America. At the first opportunity with the ease of travel restriction, the youth have been the first one to not only go to the local pubs, restaurant, but also to travel. In South Africa's case, to go to outdoor venues and pursue outdoor activities, and certainly take the calculated risk to travel to tourism and hospitality products, because by nature, I mean, they are the most risk averse compared to your earlier point around corporates that are quite reluctant based on the feedback that they've had from employees to send their staff for travel purposes, and also more broadly, given the uptake of platforms such as the one that we're on in terms of facilitating doing business, corporates have been quite reluctant to encourage their employees to travel for business purposes.
So Leanne, I get the feeling for the MICE market, it is a time for masked balls to start happening. Okay, so not going to go too much into supply trends, but maybe just to say to the industry out there that, you know, we see some trends starting to happen on different usage. So we see hotels starting into self-catering apartments instead of using the rooms differently. We see the absolute importance of tech. Obviously, no touch rules is definitely certainly the rise of apart hotels. I've had several indicators of using B&B Airbnb far more often to try and get sort of where my family can go, and where I can sort of be in my bubble and use it that way. But even with hotels, you know, we're sort of starting to look at, instead of having people in different floors, being able to book in on one wing or one hallway, so that we stay within our group of, I guess, safe bubble that is important for us. And then, Joby, you've come across this quite a lot. I come across it recently in doing some hotel feasibilities, is just the changing in staffing that is happening, and people taking on more multiple skills, and whether this is going to be a short-term thing and a return in the longer term, or whether this is going to be something that is going to happen from here on forward. Yeah,
I believe it's a game changer because of, you know, the obvious benefits to the operational efficiencies of hotels in terms of having a lean staff structure, but also while prioritizing the service offering to guests. I think it's going to be one of the trends that have started during COVID that is going to persist post-COVID. I mean, just to mention on the second icon, which is guest houses and B&B. I mean, one of the key trends there is cleanliness and professionalism. That is quite important, especially with the introduction of universally accepted and adopted health protocols of tourism products, which is quite important in lifting not only the professionalism in terms of B&Bs and guest houses, but also the hygiene and also the health protocols and processes within those establishments. And like I mentioned, from a caravan and camping perspective, we have seen especially increased uptake, especially from the youth travel market, in terms of outdoor pursuits, caravaning, camping, especially in the South African context, where before a total ease of travel was introduced, people could travel within provinces, and as interprovincial travel was introduced, there was an increasing uptake for camping and caravan.
So Leanne, let's talk a little bit about transport and I guess the intermediaries. I think you mentioned that a little bit earlier in one of your slides when you talked about the rates, that squeeze on fees that we see coming through a bit more. You want to take that up for us in those supply trends?
Yes. Okay. So from an intermediary perspective, we are going to see a questioning of the role that the intermediaries are playing. So they have to really be focused on their USP and what they are delivering and provide that USP and that service. There could definitely going to be a squeeze on fees for intermediaries. And people are also considering new ways of paying. So there's quite a sort of considerations of stay now, pay later. and different ways of, so I think some of the traditional ways of working might not be there going forward, and we need to be open and considerate of new ways of working. Just because you did it that way previously doesn't mean it's going to stay this way going forward. When it comes to transport, yeah, so we are going to see what I see, smaller loads and more flexibility around transport. And I think that this is actually creating an opportunity. It creates an opportunity for transport for those people that own wheels, to look at alternative ways of actually providing transport. So in other words, it's going to be a higher cost for the tourists, but there's going to be more flexibility in it. I do also see opportunities around, with the demise of Greyhound. I do see opportunities for more sort of scheduled smaller loads between smaller towns. So particularly tourist type transport, so moving between, say, for example, Fontaine and Cape Town. Those types of opportunities. And then we are also going to see quite a bit more in terms of an integration. So this is from almost accommodation perspective, but an integration of the work stay play. So people want to achieve a lot in one location. They don't want to move around. They want to have their office. So they travel for business. I want to have my office, my meetings. I want to have it where I'm staying. I want to eat there as well. And I want recreation there as well. So we're going to see an adaptation of facilities. So to create a lot of that. So almost a combination of a WeWork with a hotel, and some sort of additional recreational coming into it as well. So these to me are opportunities from a supply perspective.
Jay, are we talking here about city dwellers, or is this also for the, I don't know, beach market and the sort of internal, maybe more in the park areas? Does work like stay play?
Yeah, I think it's more applicable to city dwellers, given that, with the increasing uptake of remote working and also the sharing economy in terms of shared spaces. I think there's a increasing demand from city dwellers in particular to take advantage of the remote working uptake to work in different environments. For example, taking, let's say, a month-long work holiday to Cape Town to work there while still being able to pursue other leisure activities. Similarly, in other Southern Cape destinations such as your Plettenberg Bay, Knysna, or even in the east in terms of Durban. There's also opportunities certainly for people along the coast to take up similar opportunities going up north to the bush around the Kruger National Park, especially in facilities that offer comfortable long stay environments, strong connectivity to facilitate the working remotely perspective, and also offer, to Leanne's point, a combination of work, stay, and play environment, which would be quite key to attract market demand from that perspective.
So tech is going to be important. Wi-Fi is going to be important, and we're not necessarily going to be able to charge for it in the future like we do at some places still in South Africa. This is the absolute must-have.
And then also support for the whole family.
Yes.
So I mean, you see this is happening quite a lot. Haven't seen too much in South Africa, but have seen it quite a lot in other countries, where they offer a work, stay, play environment, but also homeschooling support. So can you imagine? I'd love it. Can I go move to the Wild Coast for 3 months? I have excellent Wi-Fi. I'll work from there, but can somebody please homeschool my children for me while I'm working? We can all surf in the afternoon, be on the beach, but still achieve what we need to achieve on a daily basis.
From an academic point of view, fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get down to those last points of let's look for the opportunities to rethink and reset. Leanne, identification, what do we need to do? I mean, we've spoken about the process, we've spoken about the rethink process, bringing it back to that now. How do we identify?
So, Chriselle, I think we have we've given quite a lot of suggestions, and we've spoken quite a lot about the model. And it's up to each individual owner now to really have that deep introspection about determining what their USP is, what's their unique selling point, what differentiates you from your competitor down the road or up the road, and you need to strengthen that. So you need to work on that and strengthen it and really differentiate yourself. It might be tech, it might be markets, it might be how you position your product, it could be service, but identify what you're doing. Also start looking for new opportunities and new products. Keep your mind open. Think laterally about what you're doing. Just because you did it that way previously, it doesn't mean it's still going to apply going forward. So think about what the markets are likely going to want in the future and try and adapt your product or even bring in new products to meet those particular needs. So this is a time of introspection to actually identify some of those opportunities. And I mean, for example, we speak quite liberally about the fact that, is there not an opportunity here to actually start rewarding healthcare workers? And we've got an underserviced sector, travel and tourism sector, and we've got an overworked healthcare and frontline workers. Surely there's an opportunity that big business and others and NGOs can start to sponsor holidays for the well-deserving healthcare workers and our frontline workers. So there's an opportunity. So it's about thinking through these types of opportunities. And I mean, and it's I think let's move on to improving and expanding, and then capitalizing. I think we can bring in some more examples there.
From an improving and expanding perspective, what's important, given what we mentioned in terms of the opportunities brought upon by remote working and also shared working spaces, I think products now needs to consider, I mean, at a minimum, the widely accepted and adopted hygiene protocols, together with staff training and awareness. But they also have to consider making an investment or improving their connectivity or providing facilities where their guests, especially if they stay, as you mentioned, Leanne, for 3 months in the Wild Coast, is there a designated area where Leanne can work while the kids are being homeschooled? Or is there a designated place that is almost similar to a school setup where kids can be stationed for homeschooling while still away from home? I think identifying opportunities and making the necessary investment or expansion in that regard to attract those markets will be quite key from a product offering perspective.
So let's bring sorry, Leanne.
No, I just want to say, when it comes back to sustainability, that links back to our very first discussion with Christelle when we were talking about the Rethink model and making sure you've got the systems and processes, data, the trust in place to ensure that your business is sustainable going forward. And sustainability, not just from a greening responsible tourism point of view, it's making sure your business is sustainable going forward. So look at what you can do to make sure that you are sustainable.
In order to be sustainable, you need to capitalize on certain things that are just there to capitalize on, or that you can grow and create. So, for instance, the exchange rate that can be positive for us in most cases. The outdoor, the fact that we've got a very big outdoor. It was interesting. We were talking to our Irish colleagues. And they have a whole program where businesses can obtain funding to create outdoor spaces attached to restaurants and hotels, etc. And because it's such a rainy country, it's so hard to do. Well, we don't have the same issues. We've got a lot of outdoor spaces already. So come to our outdoors rather. Yes, sell it more, so really capitalize on it. Capitalize on flexibility and adaptability, but because we've got this ability to do outdoor and indoor, particularly if you look at, for instance, at the MICE industry, yes, we can't meet in whatever, but we can have maybe more people in an outdoor setting. So let's try and do it in an outdoor basis. and therefore still be able to do those linkages. So adapt the spaces, collaborate. We have talked a lot about information, data, research. We really think it's time for the industry to collaborate on getting data that really helps the industry to make decisions. Crowdfunding perhaps into data research products that answers the questions regarding what does the new emerging market in domestic want? What is the real? How do they want to be contacted? How do they want to book? How do they want to pay? Do we know all of this? And in the end, so that we can build back better. I think we don't just want to return, we want to return better, and hopefully be more resilient going into the future and continuously from there on, so that we basically have Africa as a tourism success. And that's what we at BDO want and do, as we work for that tourism success in Africa. So thank you, my colleagues, Leanne, Jabulani. I hope that this has been an informative session for you. We would, of course, love to answer any questions and send them to us. We've given you contact addresses there, and let us hear from you, answer questions where we can, or just put you on the right track of where we think you could get those answers.